I'd like to welcome everyone to Centering Community. On behalf of the board and the members of the league, I want to first do my thank yous. And so first and foremost, the league wants to thank its members because it's because of your support, this program, all the other programs you saw on the intro slides are made possible. So check our website for any more details. And I just want to highlight that Centering Community tonight was also is also co-sponsored by the Irwin Channon's School of Architecture, the Cooper Union, and organized by the Architecture League. You saw that our programs are sponsored in part by the New York State Council on the Arts with the support of the Office of the Governor and New York State Legislature. But tonight, I want to encourage you all to make good use of the First Friday program and to point out that Hector's is coming up and they are going to be remote and this goes and be followed by SOM in person. So without further ado, I would really like to point out that these programs are going to be accompanied, there's a series of them. So building community is going to follow, and I believe, and there's a number of architects, just some details on it. And it's going to be called, and it's Bugchi Architects, Rogers, Partners, Sage and Coombs, and Andrea Steele. And it will be in person at the Scholastic Auditorium. Tonight, we are joined by so many talented architects in Mexico and a couple in New York City. And I have the honor to introduce Carlos Zedillo Velasco, who organized the PILARES program. In really looking through this material, this has huge lessons, not only for New York City, but for cities all over the United States and Canada about how design and communities work together. Carlos Zedillo, his whole career has been dedicated to promoting collaborative design processes. He was the coordinator for this PILARES initiative and worked as a consultant to the Mexico City government. Previously, he directed the Research Center for Sustainable Development at Mexico's National Housing Fund for Workers. And with his brother, Rodrigo, he founded Piensa Sustainable, a not-for-profit organization that explores contemporary Mexican conditions in relationship to the United States 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. I'm also proud to share an alma mater, because he holds an MArch and a BArch in Art and Architecture, both from Yale, and currently practices in Mexico City. And Carlos has an amazing presentation for you to follow. Moderating tonight's work and presentations by all the architecture firms attending will be Suleman Anaya, who is a journalist from Mexico City, a graduate of the AA in London, and his work, both on historic and contemporary Mexican architecture and design, is in all of the journals we all read: Architecture Review, Pinup, Vanity Fair, Apartamento. And he splits his time, I thought this is wonderful, between Queens, New York, and Coyoacan. Thank you both. I'm going to pass off now to Carlos. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. Thank you so much to everyone. This is a really special day for myself as an architect, because we're today a number of Mexican, international, old professors, people that I admire deeply, together to have a discussion about a project that we've been working in the past, I would say, 2.5 years. And that finally is becoming a reality. So thank you so much to the league, to all the attendees, and to all my colleagues that I'm going to present briefly to you. Next slide, please. I think it's important for you to know where we come from as this collaborative process that Claire was mentioning in the introduction. As she mentioned, I had the opportunity to direct the Research Center for Sustainable Development at Infonavit. And it was very striking at the beginning that the involvement of architects was very little in the idea of public and social housing. So one of the first things that happened is that we team up with a number of fantastic architects and start discussing the possibility of how to improve public and social housing. And at that time, I found terrific enthusiasm from a number of colleagues from not only Mexico, but all over the world, from universities. And we began thinking of projects and ideas of how to make the life better of those that lived in public and social housing. And during that time, which was a commission that lasted for myself and some other team members for about 7 years, we were able to produce around 1,300 projects that range from the idea of small interventions for already constructed social housing to new development projects, to a lot of work in renovation of existing housing projects and developing parks and public spaces. And on the screen, you're seeing some of those examples. If you can go to the next image as well. Next slide, please. We had the opportunity to participate and we did a lot of projects that had to do with rural, urban. We also gained a lot of experience in terms of disaster relief. You might know some of the projects that we did at the time in Jojutla. And then, as also Claire mentioned, after I finished that job, we created a foundation called Piensa Sostenible, in which we continue to collaborate with several architects. And on the screen, you're seeing a number of those prototypes that we, with the effort and the talent and the time that a lot of the architects, some of which are here today, that also participate in those projects back in the day, but then also participate in the PILARES initiative, were part of. No? And these were beautiful projects because I always think of our profession as a necessity and not a commodity. No? And I have very beautiful memories of taking a bus with my colleagues, 25 hours driving to the south of the country, to Oaxaca, and meeting with families and developing projects for them. So that experience, I think, gave me the opportunity to be contacted some years after that commission by, if you can go to the next slide, by the Mexico City government. And on the screen, we're seeing the image of Doctora Claudia Sheinbaum, who's the leader of this project, who has been set up a very strong agenda in social aspects, but also that she has the capacity to reach out to other professionals to try to solve some very interesting and pressing social issues. Next slide. This, I think, is a really important person in the project, who you're seeing on the screen. It's Jesus Antonio Esteva, who is the Director of Public Works of Mexico City. And basically, he's the person in charge in the government for the project. How did I end up speaking to, I haven't had the chance to greet Doctora Sheinbaum in person, but I have greeted Jesus Antonio Esteva many times with the project. But this happened, if you can go to the next slide, because these two architects, and some of my colleagues might don't know this part of the story, had a conversation with Claudia Sheinbaum and Jesus Esteva. And at that time, they told them that they were doing the PILARES initiative and that they wanted to invite and talk to more architects. And it was then Enrique Norten and Alberto Kalach, who I deeply admire, that talked to them about the work that I have done in the recent years on collaboration. They invited me to a meeting where I exposed to the government the importance of architects in public works. And then after that, some months after, I received a call, and they asked me to start curating and analyzing the program of PILARES, in which Mexico City government could invite many other professionals to join the program. So I'm very thankful to Enrique, and to Alberto, and to all my colleagues, because at the end, architecture is about collaboration. And they were the ones that put me in contact at the time with the Mexico City government, that then led to this fantastic initiative that we're talking about today. Next slide. PILARES stands for Points of Innovation, Freedom, Art, Education, and Knowledge. They're this type of community centers in which people that haven't yet finished a lot of their education can go to these centers and do a lot of after school or during the day, other types of practices. They can go there and do carpentry. They can, anyway, to continue, and I'll move faster so you can get to see the projects. Next slide, please. So at that time, we were asked to analyze. It's important to understand that the PILARES initiative, it's not only these 25 projects that we're going to talk about today, but it's really a group of 300 projects. But the difference between these projects is that the other projects were being designed and built by construction or developers, or without the help of architects. So I think one of the major changes that we were able to convince the city is that we should divide always the development of the design from the construction process. Know that for the government to be able to have a sense of what's going to be built, they needed to separate it, the work of the architect and the design, and then after that go and do the construction. So I think this is a major change in which we do social projects in Mexico, because often governments have very little time to both design and build the projects. So I think this was a major change. At that time, we helped the government developing the briefs for the projects. It was very difficult to fulfill the requirements that the city had gave to us and the architects, because not only the architects were in charge of design, they needed to do the entire executive project. They needed to be in close communications with engineers to do the topography. They needed to contact their own teams to do the soil mechanics. They were doing a lot of presentations to the city and to the users and to the local government and so on. And it's really important that a lot of this process happened at the time of the pandemic. So like the way we're doing today, a lot of these meetings happened from a distance. So I'm super grateful to all my colleagues, because they spend a lot of time trying to figure out, but how did we pick the firms? Because this was a very difficult task. We created an indicator of experiences of the projects, and we analyzed a number of firms, and we looked at the years that they had in the professional field, how many national build projects they have done, whether they have done international projects that they were built. We analyzed the total number of projects, whether if they have been involved in publications, exhibitions. All of them in the program have an important relationship to academia, obviously, and this is something extra, but all of them have received awards in recognition. I think most, if not all of them, have postgraduate studies. And really, we wanted to present to the city a group of professionals that if they were given the chance to help the city, we could prove as a profession that architects are a necessity and that we can bring something extra to the table. And it was wonderful to put together this group of people. Next slide, so I can run through the last slides. And this is the crew. But this is the crew only with the leaders, and behind all these people, there's a number of architects and people behind it, and probably you can recognize some of them, but you will see some of them speak today. But yeah, then we were able to give them the sites, the briefs. We had terrific participation from a number of firms. They did all the analysis. We helped them in the urban. Then they began developing the projects. If you can go to the next slide, please. Some images of the renderings. There we can see a map. I think this is a very relevant piece of information. The whole investment for the program was around 264 million pesos, which is, I think it's around $25 million, around that idea. And so this is a really important investment, but I think it's a big stretch for the investment, for the amount of work that the city has produced for that investment, including these terrific professionals on all this program. Next. There we can see a drawing of the locations of some of the projects throughout the city that we will send to you for better review. Some of images of how the sites were. Some of these places were in total decay. And we worked, and there we can see images. I'm just going to go through them. The project that Jorge Ambrosi and Gabriela Chegaray did. Next, a project that was a beautiful collaboration between Nacho Urquiza, Amal, Andros, and Dan Wood. Next, another one by them, because they were supposed to do one-on-one, and then they team up. The project that was recently finished by Alberto Calach downtown. A project by Alonso de Garay in a very complex site in Mexico City, also done. A wonderful project by Saidi, Springal, and Jose Castillo that had the opportunity to do two because one was canceled, and then they did another one. Next, wonderful project also done with the amazingly talented Rozana Montiel that you're going to see today. Next, Fernanda Canales' work. She also went through a very difficult process. She'll talk about it today because she did two projects because some restrictions, because this project was located near a prison. A project that's still on the works, developed by Frida Escobedo, that hopefully will get built very soon. We're working on it. Next. A project by R0 in a very decayed area of Mexico City, wonderful firm as well. Next, a project by a very special architect and friend, Tatiana Bilbao, that's also about to start construction really soon. Next, a wonderful project by Gabriela Carrillo that she's gonna talk to us about. With a lot of effort and wonderful meetings that we had with the government. Another really interesting project by Alejandro Sanchez that he did in collaboration with a younger firm, which it's already finished. Next, a project done by Derek Delecam and Yachen. At that time, they were still teammates. Now they have separate firms, but the project's already completed. Wonderful project near Xochimilco. Next. A project that had some changes, and we're still trying to figure out what's going to be the future of this project, but developed by architect Javier Sanchez. Next. This is, sorry, the title is wrong. This is a project developed by Julio Gaeta and Louis Springle. Amazing, really difficult project, a very small site. So you can see the difference there. Some of them are more vertical, depending on the land. The project I had previous one of my other mentors, Enrique Norten, that's almost done. Next. A beautiful project that's about to happen in Xochimilco has gone through some changes, but we're still trying to figure out with the government what's going to be the future of this project, by terrific Guadalajara firm. Then the projects that Camilo Restrepo and Felipe Uribe Diaz, a collaboration, that actually are the first hybrid steel and wood buildings in Mexico City for a public building. Next, a beautiful collaboration of Francisco Pardo and Laura González Fierro that it's also about to start. This is a renovation, and we're going to talk about it today. Next, this is a really interesting project. One of the last firms that started their project was PRODUCTORA, and then they team up with Palma, but it was also one of the first projects to be completed, a wonderful project in the Mandarena Contreras that we're going to hear about today. Next. And some other images of the TO, Camilo Restrepo, and Felipe Uribe initiative to do the projects. Next. More, because they were supposed to do one each one, but then they decided to team up. Another renovation in the Tepito area of Mexico City done by Lanza Atelier, by a wonderful young firm. Next, another project, as the story I told you previously, Jose and Saidi developed two because one was canceled and then they did another one. So now we have the luck to have two of their projects, both of them built and finished. Next. Fernanda Canales project, which is a second iteration, and this is the actual build project that we're going to talk about today. And that's it. Sorry for running, but really I just want to say that I'm super thankful to all the my colleagues, to the Mexico City government, to the league, to some of my professors that are probably listening to this presentation. A lot of this collaboration process I was taught when I was in school. And I think this is the way to go in architecture. And I'm really thankful for this moment with you. And now let me hand the microphone to the stars of the night. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. Wonderful to be here. I'll have to run through the slides a little bit as well. It's very important to explain that this is a collaboration between PRODUCTORA and Palma that teamed up to work on this project together. It's in the south of Mexico City, it's called Pilares Priani, and it's in the Magdalena Contreras borough. It's a very interesting plot. It's a triangular plot in the middle of a whole set of roads and a sort of a neighborhood marked by topography. You can see that on the top right corner of this triangular plot, there's actually another piece of building, which is a liconza, which is actually a social support program that distributes milk to people, the most vulnerable parts of the society. So apart from that liconza area, the whole plot was ours. And it's an urban area with a lot of very basic housing. A lot of these houses actually constitute of very simple rectangular volumes, mostly stuccoed brickwork, and that became something important as well for the design of our project. I quickly want to take a moment, and maybe we can talk about it more in the final discussion about the numbers and the finances that with such a project. And then I want to highlight here, so there's a cost of $63 per square foot, which even in Mexico is actually a very low cost. So we really wanted, how can we make a strong, comfortable, high ceiling spaces for this social infrastructure for the price of basically economic social housing. And that became a really key thought during this process. In the end, we're spending taxpayers' money, and we felt a very strong responsibility. So the site, a relatively decayed site, but what was interesting, we had a whole set of existing steel structures on the site, and we immediately understood that there's value in there, and we said we have to reuse these existing steel structures to reuse these foundations to step ahead and to save some money and to save some time. So here you can see in the drawing on the right-hand side, liconza, the milk, the social support structure for milk, but then in the brown and the orange, there's existing columns, and we basically continued these columns to the left of the plot, and organizing a set of very simple Platonic volumes above those columns, adapting itself to the shape, this narrow triangular side of the plot. After some explorations, we understood that we were happy with this very regular elements, and we understood that actually the beauty of this project lies exactly in this horizontal line that's kind of floating above the soft topography from the side. This combined with this stepped volume of all these different Platonic shapes that kind of follow the shape of the plot. We found that already very interesting, and we also immediately knew that we wanted to work with a sort of quality, a sort of texture a sort of a play on these stucco facades we saw so much around us in the context. So in the ground floor plan, as you can see here, you see on the right-hand side an entry, a sort of urban lobby as a sort of entrance space, then the access to the general lobby and a computer lab. And then when you take the stairs or the elevator to the next level, it's basically 3 different rooms, a multi-purpose room, a print workshop, and a carpentry workshop. So when you look at this from the outside, you see this, you see these elements, these volumes appearing in the urban environment. And where you see the lady looking at the announcements, that is what we call this urban vestibule, this urban lobby, this urban living room that gives access to the front of this building, to the entrance door. This is access. This is the view to the computer lab in direct connection to the street, and then staircase up, and then you enter in these volumes above. And here you see again these boxes generate a differentiation in heights for the different rooms, and like by carefully positioning these windows, we create a sort of spaces that are very generous, like this carpentry workshop, the print workshop, or the multi-purpose space with its own terrace. So what for us was really important when we look at this place and we see how this ensemble of volumes is kind of placed within this ocean of small-scale rectangular volumes that constitute the neighborhood, we really thought of how can we make a constructive system that kind of works, that would allow us to build better spaces, but also as fast and as cheap as the previously built PILARES, as Carlos said. And my time is up, but here you see basically we reuse the structure, we use a very basic industrial facade panel system, and then this stucco, which feels almost like a do-it-yourself stucco, expressing a little bit the hands-on activity that takes place inside. Thank you very much.
Hello, can you hear me? Oh,
Yes.
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 Perfect. So let's present this project. This is a collaboration between my firm and Laura FIERRO that is here. I have to say that this, sorry, my dog just dropped my computer, sorry. So this is a collaboration that was fantastic, and we started to work on can you show us the next slide, please? We started to work on a retrofitting project in a fantastic neighborhood that is a super decay neighborhood that is the center there, the number 6, that is called Buenos Aires in Cuauhtemoc borough in Mexico City. And this is a complicated situation in the city because it's right next to one of the big highways, and next to the older city before the 50s. That is Doctores, Roma, and so on. And it's a leftover area that started up in a really bad context of good in infrastructure, but bad in the terms that it became really decay very quick. And it's a commercial area. The delinquency levels are super high. So this is the right position to put a PILARES in. So you see here the infrastructure. Next, please. The idea of using an existing building, it's practically what we really like, recycling buildings, recycling a fantastic structure from the 50s. This was an ex-nursery for the IMSS, the Institute of Health in Mexico City, a super important program in the 20th century, that some of their infrastructure were great architecture like this one. You can see even murals and the original structure there. So what Laura and I thought about this is to first understand the idea of demolishing all the add-ons that were really badly done in the 80s, 1790s, 80s, and put it back to its original kind of bones and structure. If you see here on the left, there's a horrible big roof of metal that was done in the latest years to have extra room, of course, have extra square meters after it was a nursery. But in the right, you see the original structure that is fantastic. So one of the main things that we consider is to bring it back to its nature, and then from that point start designing. So first you start to design with the eraser, and then you start to use the pencil. Next. So the program, it's very simple. The original structure was set in these three kind of volumes with patios. Those are the green areas. Some of these patios were covered during the time. Those are the ones that were taking out the roofs and the post structures that were add-on. And then the program is very simple. It's one of the big PILARES ones. We have a lot of space, so we were able to put a lot of different uses, from computer labs to carpentry to welding to a huge auditorium that is in the upper part that was part of the IMSS infrastructure. Next. And then keeping that kind of composition of these blocks and patios, we also integrated and we took out the fence that was dividing the exterior from the interior, to be able to have a condition that it's more urban and more permeable from the street in. This is very controversial because it's a very complicated area of the city, but we think that also it could be the way to start to engage public programs with the city and start to lower those problems in the city, instead of having fences, having great public space in the building. So the building becomes, of course, a private area on the back, but it becomes more public as you come closer to the street, and the street blends to the inside. Also with the idea of materials, the idea is that the same street and sidewalk material kind of goes into the vestibule and to the public areas of the building. Next. So this is what I'm talking about. It's like this doesn't have fence. It doesn't look like a wall. It doesn't have a glass that divides. Of course, it has ways of controlling that in further in the project. But at the beginning, the look of the building has to be very transparent and very public. Laura, if you want to.
Yeah, I'll jump in quickly because I think we're running out of time. Thank you, Francisco.
Yes.
And I also want to thank Francisco for the invitation to collaborate. As Carlos mentioned, it's been collaborations within collaborations, so very excited. And quickly, just to point out what Francisco was talking about, this programmatic extension of the urban plaza. So we wanted people to be able to use the building when even the school was closed, and in order not to affect the school activities. Also, during the day, people could go directly up into this public space. I'll just show you quickly a bit of the images, and then I will finish here into a very important drawing that I think kind of is the ethos of the project. It puts the architecture in the background, but at the foreground, it brings the labor force. Which is this collective of individuals that, activate the space basically with their skills. And it's the skills that will give them a living, that will make them belong to a trade. And these skills will actually transform into income for them and their families. So I think this is kind of the main purpose, and open up the building in general. So I think we ran out of time, so we're going to just leave it there, but thank you.
Okay, so hello, I'd like to thank Luis, the Architectural League team, Carlos Zedillo, of my colleagues, and everyone that's here that could join us today. So thank you very much. And I will speak about Florida Azucena, which is in a neighborhood in Iztapalapa, a very challenging site because it's just next to a prison, Reclusorio Oriente. Approximately measures almost 20 whole blocks. So you have this twofold condition of having a huge neighbor that's concealed completely with very violent condition, very high and robust walls, fences all over. And then you have the very domestic scale towards the other side, the Iztapalapa neighborhood, characterized by informal or very simple constructions. And the site had this, for me, it was very important to obtain two different conditions that seemed to be opposite, but I thought it was important to obtain both of them. One was that you were never able to see the prison, like you completely forget that you are in that place. And the second condition was that you really felt open and you could allow like everybody to visit and to feel welcome. And there was establishing a very strong visual condition. So the project is, it houses 4 courtyards, which in a way, those are the spaces that can allow for private views in order to just frame the skies. And all of the spaces open up to 2 views. One are 2 gardens that are on the sides, and then the small courtyards. So you have a cross ventilation, you have daylight and also afternoon sun. And everything in a way it's connected to this central space, but you can have like this openness without getting wet. So it's really obtaining like the condition of opening up the project as much as possible, but obviously providing this safety and private environment as well. So the plot is a rectangular site, and we obtained the cross ventilation and circulation along this courtyards. And we had to, as Carlos Zedillo explained before, this project was actually 2 projects because we showed a first project that was accepted, and then we ended up taking a floor away because we needed to provide just 1 floor for security reasons. So a very horizontal building, very low rise, and we couldn't use a rooftop, which was a intention initially, but the courtyards provide this extension and a way of opening up towards the outside with a small forum, and the connection, the visual connection, always towards the outside, in a way making the sidewalk enter the building and connected with the different services, the workshops. We have multi-purpose room, we have carpentry workshops, gardens, and places just to have like a small garden and an outdoor space. So everyone in a way feels invited and you feel safety. Another intention was to requalify the local materials. Like I didn't want to impose a building that seemed foreign in the place. So it's the structure and the elements are just made in concrete, and then you have the lattice, terracotta lattice on the outside. So in a way, it's providing the idea that the materials that the community uses regularly are also something to value and to look forward. I mean, to really highlight that condition and not imposing a foreign element. So these are just images of the construction, the process, how the building was always facing like the rear. We had to enter through the side. You never had this visual connection. Actually, it was like the back of the prison always. So then just opening up the building and facing towards the street completely changed the condition that the neighbors always had in relation to the prison. So it was like obtaining this intimacy and a new spirit of the place. These are images of the construction process taken by Rafael Gamo recently and during the summer. The building's still not completed. It's not still clear the final result, but at least we have these spaces that we can control, and you can frame the sky, you can feel it really connected towards the outside, and provide this idea that everybody can enter, and the fluid space that happens all along. So thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. I am Ignacio Urquiza, and I am presenting along Malandrados and Downwood from WORKac. I want to thank Anne and the whole team of the Architectural League for preparing this event, and Carlos Zedillo for the invitation to this very special program. It has been a long run, but definitely a very fun and interesting one, full of amazing discoveries and learnings. Amal, Dan, myself, and our teams were commissioned to design 2 PILARES buildings. And instead of each office designing one building and sharing some ideas, etc., we decided to fully collaborate both of them. And I think that was a great decision because of the result. The first one, we call it the blue one, is located in the west part of Mexico City, in the hills of the lower part of Santa Fe. And the second one, the green one, in Azcapotzalco, the northern part of the city, in the valley or the plain part of the city, no, in the middle of the valley. The two sites have similar conditions. They are located in corners or in the intersection of 2 or 3 streets. The blue one is in a much denser part of the city, and because of the hills and topography of that zone, you can find a lot of pedestrian streets in the surroundings. As the green one is located facing a bigger avenue in a much open, flatter, or generic location. In both sides, we found small constructions that couldn't be reused. We thought about it, but they weren't able. The state wasn't good. But the existing trees of both really shaped the 2 projects. Our first visit to the site was a bit weird. It was the very beginning of the pandemic, so the streets were completely empty. Us wearing masks and feeling like aliens in the outside. So we couldn't see much activity happening in the surroundings, but 2 rough, but at the same time beautiful neighborhoods, full of colors and constructions and different typologies there. So for the first part of our design process, we decided to look at the already existing PILARES and similar programs like El Faro del Saber or some others, and try to understand the typologies of those spaces, how they were being used and how they were being appropriated by the community. What were the particularities of each space composing these buildings?
So what was interesting, and I know it's come up as a question, you know, as architects, how did we know what was going to work for each neighborhood? And a lot of that work, which was amazing, was done before we sort of came in, and we had a chance to meet with Carlos, with representatives of the city, with those who ran the kind of social programs. And in the case of our buildings, you know, there were some similarities in terms of the cyber school, robotics, and then particulars such as jewelry, screen printing, or electronics and gastronomy for, as Ignacio said, the blue one. On the other hand, it was clear to us that program was very fluid, and that, you know, things shifted as we looked at previous PILARES. And so our approach really to program was flexibility, and to imagine or to design something for both buildings where you'd have a very clear sense of infrastructure, core circulation, etc. You'd have a sort of open plate, whether horizontal or, as you'll see, a kind of continuous plate. And then really kind of thinking about furniture and the possibility of people appropriating, transforming, changing. And, you know, during the process of the design, the program changed several times. And in fact, you know, the gastronomy program, to our great sadness, was cut. But so, you know, this kind of flexibility was really crucial. And Nacho mentioned the relationship to the trees and also the relationship between inside and outside. Obviously, this is Mexico City. It's an amazing to be able to go from one to the next, and it's something that we really wanted to emphasize. And so the expression of inside and outside, and then the expression of kind of Nacho and us had an amazing conversation about color and expression in Mexico and how we wanted kind of to tie in to some of that legacy and history. This was kind of process sketching on Zoom back and forth, kids making models in quarantine, and then testing color. We were committed to, using color because we could, as not being kind of burdened, at least for Dan and I, by Barragan's legacy, let's say. And so it really became not just a dialogue between Ignacio's office and ours, but between these two buildings, between these two neighborhoods, with kind of similarities and also differences in terms of the context and the program.
I agree. So as Amal was saying, these two buildings that are almost like brothers or cousins in a way. They share same ideas, same intentions, but different contexts and different programs. So first, we aim, like our first idea was to really integrate the exterior and the interior. Both buildings were traced by the existing trees, and we designed a plaza as a continuation of the sidewalks, a continuation of the pedestrian streets that you can find nearby. No? And the second idea was to create this continuous space, as Amal was saying, like trying to erase or forgetting about the idea that each part of the program had to be allocated in a single room. So both buildings open up in the floor plan to the street and to the plaza, and the central void that allocates the vertical circulations bring the street, bring the plaza into the building. No, so you can be walking the street, the plaza, and suddenly through the building, even if it's closed. Just as Pancho was saying, like we share that the same idea, and I think it's been working very good in this project. And for the ground floor, like our aim to activate at the same time the street, the plaza, and the building. It's really happening. It opened up a month ago, and we have been visiting the building, and it's very interesting how these three things going on at the same time are really happening.
So I know our time is up, so I'll just scroll through images of the blue one, which, as Nacho said, opened recently, and this kind of idea of sort of continuous space, circulation, flexibility, and bringing kind of light, amazing views for this building in particular. And then the opening, Dan and I were not there, but kind of got live reports, and it was really exciting to see the space being appropriated by everyone, and sort of official sort of claim of the project. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Melissa Fukumoto. I'm presenting on behalf of 10 Arquitectos, Enrique Norten, of whom Carlos just was speaking about. We were in charge, or we're still in charge, of the Pilares in Lomas de Plateros, which is different in a way to a lot of the contexts that we're seeing in the previous work. Our Lomas de Plateros is one of the first multifamily housing unit kind of areas in the city, and our site is located in the periphery of that area. So the area does have infrastructure already, but it's probably so big and so dense that it's not enough, and it has not had the best maintenance, so it's been deteriorating. And the idea of the Pilares is to bring kind of more activity to the area. Then our site itself, I don't have control, so next please. Oh, there. Yeah, so that's the entire multi-housing unit of Lomas de Plateros. The site itself is in this kind of also very interesting place. it's a triangle in itself, and then it's also it's kind of navigating this area of the housing unit where the topography is kind of all over the place. We wanted to take opportunity of that site and kind of working in two very kind of important ideas. The first idea that we had was to use the building itself as a connection between the topography of the site. So we have the residential units above, and we also have the street that is quite kind of isolated and not activated, and we wanted the building itself to work in favor of activating the street and being a kind of pathway from the residential units above to the street below. We also, because of the triangular shape, wanted to work in this idea of having a central patio that would bring light and space into the configuration of the program. And so those are the two kind of major ideas for the project. So it's the idea of working around in rings, where we have a discrete patios for all of the workshops around the building, and then the workshops themselves, then a covered circulation area, and then the main central patio that will connect the building with the rooftop kind of also workshop, but also connect the residential units above to the street below and have it be a way of navigating the topography through the building itself, which is kind of this diagram. The building itself is very kind of humble in its configuration. It's 2 floors. Most of the workshops are double height because of the kind of need for ventilation and for natural lighting. The materials that we used are kind of apparent brick walls and exposed concrete. Part of the language that we have generally in Arquitectos is the idea that the people and the program itself will bring the texture and the color to the project. And then this important area of the rooftop, where we kind of wanted it to be a second, if not the first point of entrance to the building. There's the opportunity to come into the building from the street level, but also from the roof area, from the buildings that are on the slope above. And so the idea being that the central patio is what connects both entrances in the topography, and that we're able to kind of have a building that feels like it's an exterior and an interior place, and that is able to bring people together. And so our building has gone through a very long and tedious construction process. We also started during the pandemic when everything was shut down. It is under construction now. We're still actually going to the site, and we can now see the building kind of taking place and taking shape, which is very exciting for us. And so we hope that it's finished by the end of the year. And that's pretty much it. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rozana Montiel, and I will present you the PILARES that we did. Trying to change. In Iztapalapa, in the borough of called Presidentes de Mexico. So we are also in Iztapalapa is one of the most populated municipalities. It has around 2 million people. So we're in a very dense area. Here is our site, also as many of you showed. It's so we are in a corner also with streets around, and we have a market that goes there on Thursdays. So it was really interesting, our site, because we had 2 big trees, 2 pirules, which were part of the idea where to start. So this was the site before the construction. As you can see, it was all fence gated. It was all gated. So we decided one of the main ideas was to change these barriers into open boundaries. For us, it has been really important to open spaces, to change and make this areas more permeable. So this was the area of an underused basketball court. So here you can see the market. So it was really, really important to create a plaza, an open plaza, where you can do a lot of activities and where we could connect the idea of the market going into the Pilares. It's a very vulnerable area, so we did this open plaza, but after the interior is more close to the exterior, but it's really open in its interior. I'm trying to change. So this is the idea of the plaza when you enter and how it's been occupied. It's been really, really interesting because we have been going after the construction there a lot of times. And we can see that there's been like a lot of people going in. There are around 90 activities every week. There are many, many people going there, around 300 people from different neighborhoods. There's an amazing staff working there. Frida, the director, which she is connected now, and Xochitl, Vladimir, Giovanni, Jokalin, Miriam, the policeman, all have been like really nice working with the people. We also wanted to create abundance from scarcity, so we decided to work with only 3 materials, which is stranded cinder blocks, which make a very interesting texture. Then the prefabricated concrete blocks in the floor with different textures also, and with the metal structure, which it was really hard to decide what color which we had to use, but we decided to use the mauve. So it really like mimetizes with everything. We decided to produce a sequence of spaces, which was really important. We have an amazing weather, as Amar already said. So we decided to make this sequence of spaces with patios. So the idea is that the program is distributed over 2 floors that are interconnected by a system of platforms, courtyards, bridges, and corridors. For us, what's really important to see how it's been activated, and it's really impressive how they have been using the space. Also, like bringing vegetation was really important. So this material, the stranded blocks, are used in different ways. When it's needed, it's used as lattices. Also, the connection between interior, exterior, closed and open, to blur these boundaries between what it's closed and it's open, so you can connect. So we have this forum, which serves for a lot of purposes, like here, for example, dancing. And the idea of connecting this classroom for different activities also, which is open, and then you can connect with the people that is looking at it. The second floor, which connects also with this staircase, and it has also an elevator. So it's also like for everyone, for wheelchairs and strollers. So everyone can go to the second floor. This idea of the connecting patios, as you can see here. And also it was really important to bring a sports area or a place as a playground. So as we didn't have enough space, because it was just the court, it's around 670 square meters, which is around 7,210 square foot. We decided to put it in the second floor, an area with this multifunctional and flexible program with bars and sports. So they have like all these playing areas for different activities. Here you can see the texture of the lattice, of the cinder block, with the light coming through, the shadows that it creates also. Here it's the boxing class. And here the patios that are used for also different purposes, waiting for the classes of the cyber school. So we have different workshops as serigraphy, plumbing, gastronomy, jewelry, photography. And here's how you can see also moms waiting for their kids. It's been really interesting to see how like the kids from the people that work on the supermarket have been like really interesting to leave their kids alone. So now when the market is there, the kids can go inside and they can be free and play, when before we went there and asked all the people that were in the market, how do they work when their kids are there, small kids that don't go to school, what do they do with them? So they have them really near and they couldn't do anything. And now they are free. It's like really nice to see how the kids now play inside and they feel free, and how this Pilares has been used now and today with all these activities, with all these really performances and different things going there. So we have been like really, really happy to see it in function and with people. Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm very happy to be here. Well, thank you for the invitation and happy to share this with you. Okay, this was a collaboration as well with Synthesis Architecture, and I'm Gabriela Carrillo, and I want to talk about highlights which are really important for me in this project. I love to see at the distance to the city, to the site, and to understand a little bit more. Our city is in a valley, which used to be a lake, and the project where we work is in the borders with a very steepy and complex topography. So, and it is also important to say that the density of the population there is very particular. So we worked in a site which seems to be very big, but it was used as a deposit for cars. All cars that are taken there. And it's also important to say that it is in the really border with the city. It's in the last stage where even things start to change a lot in the neighborhood, the materiality, the stones, the landscape, the constructions. So we had a great opportunity also to deal with this beautiful landscape, which was at the side of the site. And I love to understand the light, and I love to understand very basic circumstances, and also to achieve these beautiful views that were already there, but also to take off some kind of noise that was there, also to take advantage of the views, to take out the cars that were part of the context as well. So we aligned to some elements, which were these main streets. And then we tried to create a strategy, which was to create kind of a warehouse, a very flexible structure that was almost rural in a way, that could be flexible with these 4 rooms. And then we can dialogue with the topography, which was also very important for us to incorporate to our design. So take advantage of the light, create a very simple skeleton that would be that flexible, that would be easily constructed, to harvest water, which was very important for us because we have part of an urban farming program as well. And then to dialogue with materials that were part of a church image memory that was on the site and on the neighborhood, which was the only communitary program that we found was on the site. Then to design the landscape with very strategical elements, because there was also a very complex condition because the site was filled with garbage as well. So the design of the landscape was important also for protection of the site, and that was really important. And to take the decisions of which plants, like create a landscape that was in a way a protection that was intelligent enough without not water, without taking care of very simple elements, which are important as well in public buildings, and then to use the materiality as an expression itself. So for us also, it's very important to understand the process. So we were in the construction site for many days, and we love to understand how the light starts to move, how the skeleton became a geometry, which was part of the mountain as well, and then how the elements and the light itself starts to change. And also something very important was this flexibility, that the divisions between the rooms could open, and that at some point we could see one whole space, and that there was a connection between the ramps and the outdoor space. I think one of the main issues was to create a big plaza, which was also a public space and an open space. And then to wrap in a way this very abstract element that could open to the north light, and also that could open to the view of the mountains that we have. We were very lucky because the site was very beautiful in a way, and to believe that this flexibility could let the opportunity to the space, like in a way, be used in different ways, and maybe to unsolve a little bit the materiality of the building and create more a landscape. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. We are Jose and Sari from IA 911. We want to take this opportunity to talk about the challenges of working in these two PILARES project in two sites, in two geographies, and of the city radically different. This first commission was to work in Úsulo Garbán, Iztapalapa, a very dense yet low high neighborhood in eastern Mexico City, in a complex site located between an industrial and a residential neighborhood. This is a part of the city with infrastructure and investment deficits and challenges of security and economic development. Actually, the site of the PILARES itself was a safe house for a criminal group involved in kidnapping. Because of this, we believe this social infrastructure should be built notion of community in the context of a complex and dark history of the site. Our project for Úsulo Garbán PILARES starts with a simple gesture. In the corner side, through a diagonal line that produces a patio and organizes the program in two triangular buildings in the site. A roof with alternating slopes and ridges on the interior, and the exterior facades create spatial qualities in the interior, but also create a roofscape in the exterior. It is a humble building that recognizes its manufacturing context as a transition between the residential and the infrastructure and the industrial side. During the process, this project was canceled due to some local resistance that made it very difficult to begin the construction. So Carlos decided to assign us another site to make a new project on a different geography in Benito Juárez, a central borough with different challenges.
The Valentín Gómez Farías PILARES is located in a different part of the city. It's a central neighborhood, Benito Juárez neighborhood, which is one of the ones with the highest quality of life. But the site itself is within an existing park in the site of four fronton courts, and a contested site, because this site was simultaneously a place that neighbors use, but one that certain community groups asked the authorities to intervene because of criminal dealings, including drug dealing within the site. This process is important because it asks the question, what do we address social infrastructures in contested sites, which is, I think, a task that some of our colleagues have had to face. But within the neighbors, there's also difference, and there's neighbors, and there's, in this case, picket fences, protest signs to the president and to the mayor saying, okay, we should preserve these frontons. So for us, the project is very much about doing the least harm as possible. We start with two missions. First of all, not impact a single square meter more than the fronton sites and not affect a single tree, but also within the project to make certain decisions, design decisions that would make the project more sensible. Two brick lattice walls that continue and evoke the frontons, and a small and compact building, single one floor, but with a sort of exaggerated roofscape, in which 2/3 of the buildings are exterior spaces for exterior teaching and activities. but which in the section begin to produce a kind of civic mindedness, if we may use that word, of a sort of a spaces that have a quality and a relationship to the outside. So for us, this very much connected to a tradition of building social infrastructure in the city. The construction methods are very much kind of the bread and butter of brick walls and cast in place concrete. But with this kind of a sectional quality, we attempted to produce the civic mindedness, which is at the core of the social infrastructure project of the Pilares. In that same respect, the idea of the exterior spaces and how we begin to colonize and to imagine forms of relating inside and outside, forms of sort of mixing within the park, and forms of addressing this idea of civic monumentality was crucial for us. Finally, and we would just like to say that, and here's kind of like a shout out for Carlos and for the team and for everyone who has kind of placed his faith, is that we were lucky to do two Pilares, and the Pilares of Úrsulo Galván came back after that crisis with neighbors. It is now in the process of being built, and we hope we can finish and open it in the next few weeks. But the most important part for us is to kind of reimagine a tradition of social infrastructure that was very strong from the state in Mexico, building markets and schools, and thinking that social infrastructure can be about sobriety and civic monumentality. But most important, that a more democratic, equitable, and geographically distributed social investment is part of what any progressive government and the agenda of the state should be. So we're very grateful and thank you.
Thank you.
Well, hi everyone. My name is Jose Amos Urrutia from Estudio, and this is also a collaboration between three offices, two from Colombia, which are Camilo Restrepo's Agendas ARC office and Felipe Uribe's office. So we're very glad and thankful with the Architectural League, and especially with Carlos and Rodrigo Zedillo for inviting us to this dialogue and this opportunity of making these public spaces. So I will start, oh yeah, here it is, with the next slide. With this image, these are two photographs taken recently actually by Santiago Arau. Both pictures are from Mexico City today, and they show us this urban oxymoron that we live in. On one hand, we live on a landscape that around us still has this beauty of the right-hand image, which is a lake. On the left-hand side is this massive concrete stain that we have to work with. So our three Pilares are a strategy to work with this hidden geometry and to connect three projects with the geography around the city, like the mountains and the historical sites. Today we will talk about Zapote, which is one of the three Pilares we designed as a team. And it has the virtue of being in a very high dense neighborhood with high levels of violence in a very narrow street, but it's also facing Cuicuilco, a very important historical site in Mexico City. So we decided to make a viewpoint to this historical place. For us, it was important to turn these buildings into instruments that rain harvest the water and to shift the water paradigm in city. As you know, Mexico City has the problem of water scarcity, and the building should become a harvester itself. So as you can see in these pictures, that the building is under construction, and the icon of the building is this inverted rooftop that rain harvests the water. So I will let Carlos continue with the explanation.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, as you can see, one of the main challenges of this project was to solve a diverse program in a very narrow plot, only 7.8 meters wide, that is 8.5 yards, more or less. So we then thought that of an intermittent strategy of patios and gardens, a space for vegetation, natural light, and good cross ventilation to the service and teaching spaces. It is a flexible scheme that allows shifting programs in the future. For now, they will work as a cyber school, a room for dance classes, serigraphy, and urban farming on the roof. We thought that the structural design will be the great ally to solve the problems of the narrow dimensions, limited budgets, and gain a lot of flexibility. So we were inspired by the logic of acupuncture and in a way by the quickness of scaffolding systems. Our engineer helped us achieve a structural system result only with a single 10 centimeters, that is 4-inch main metal element mixed with laminated wood. In our country, in our country, unfortunately, the use of wood is not very common, much less in a public building. We believe it was important to walk in that direction due to its environmental contribution.
Thank you, Facio. So for us, it was very important to link the form of the building with the structure and the ramp system. We wanted to avoid any kind of mechanical systems in the building. Therefore, the ramps avoid using a lift, but at the same time, we're avoiding also any mechanical system for ventilation or the use of AC. So all this system for ramps, we thought it was very important for people to meet in, as if it was a sidewalk that was going up into the building, and at the same time connecting the different volumes that were interlaced or separated at the same time by a very clear system of patios, trying to create this space of the in-between where you cannot be fully inside, fully outside, but create this idea and this atmosphere of a very public system, a building that it can be seen from the outside, that the spaces have relations one to the other, in the sense that people can learn from being even in a patio. So last, we also thought that there was this beautiful possibility to have the orchard growing up and taking its part also as landscape, swallowing the architecture. Can you do play to the short video, please? So this was more or less the idea of the space. You can see the different blocks separated, but also at the same time tied by these voids, gardens, and some other outside spaces placed inside the building for people to meet and enjoy and learn. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thanks in particular for the audience that's taking the time to be with us tonight. I wanted to remind everyone that this is your opportunity to submit questions in the Q&A tab to any participant that just presented or to all of them. And that said, I'd like to congratulate Carlos for once again spearheading such an ambitious, socially minded initiative, and also to all the architects that just presented. Bravo for such excellent work. As Anne mentioned at the beginning of the hour, I had the good fortune to visit almost all of the projects we just saw a few days ago over the course of a weekend. And I just felt like doing it. It was something I just felt I would be more informed for tonight's event. I didn't know what to expect. And all I'll say is that if you ever have a chance to be in Mexico City, or if you are in Mexico City and can visit even just a handful of these projects, I highly recommend it. It's a very rich, rewarding experience. What struck me, I think, over the 2 days that I drove around this gigantic city with some friends visiting some Pilares, is the variety of the solutions that the architects came up with, which in a way is perfect for a city as complex as Mexico City. It matches the city's complexity. the thoughtfulness that was evident in each project, which always took into account the needs of the community first, which is why the PILARES exist in the first place, and also perhaps unexpectedly, even though maybe not so much, the beauty of some of these projects. The creative inventiveness that we saw tonight, and I think is even more evident in person, is all the more commendable given the serious budget and site constraints that each firm faced, that has been addressed by some of the presenters today. And just to give you an idea for anyone who's not in Mexico, who's following tonight's event, but is not in Mexico right now and maybe hasn't been able to see the projects, we are talking about structures that are scattered across what may be one of the largest metropolitan areas on the continent, if not the world. And they have been planted purposely, as Carlos explained, in marginalized neighborhoods, which means far out in many cases. So this is not the Mexico City that visitors see when they visit, which are more central. This is a swath of Mexico City where a large part of the local population's daily life unfolds. It's dense, it's largely unplanned, it's very vibrant, it's often lacking in infrastructure, but it's important to keep in mind that despite of the problems that many of these neighborhoods have, from water shortage that was just mentioned to crime, the list is long. They also possess a logic, a character, and a sense of place and functionality that has developed over time and was important to respect. And I think all of the architects invited were able to do in their own unique ways. So you have in this very chaotic, vast landscape, urban landscape, you have the PILARES that are often on what seem to me like residual lots that vary in shape and size. And once again, the variety, I think, is the key word. We have, after visiting 3 or 4 PILARES, I just was struck by how different they all are, which is a direct, I think, is a direct measure of how tailor-made they were to the neighborhoods they serve. And I don't know if it was mentioned, I'm sure Carlos mentioned it, but the way I understood it is there was first, the communities were consulted and involved before the design process in order to develop programs so that the architects could develop programs that would respond to their very specific needs. Another thing that is notable is that this is architecture that I think it was maybe Melissa who used the word humble. It's the opposite of statement architecture. These buildings don't impose. I think by definition and necessity, they can't, given their limited budgets and intention. They're relatively small buildings produced inexpensively. That said, I have to say they are, once again, I hate to use the word beautiful, but the majority of these projects exude a certain presence and have aesthetic. There's architectural gestures that to me were unexpected. And I think what Carlos said in his presentation, that he sees architecture not as a necessity, but as not as a commodity, but as a necessity, could be extended after having seen the PILARES. You could say the same thing about why should beauty or a thoughtful building that's well designed, but also creates a positive spatial aesthetic sensation, be something that's reserved for a more privileged community. I have to also mention that of the 7 or 8 projects we visited, they were all in different stages of occupation and operation, and to some extent of construction, which I think has been touched on today, that for various reasons, some are more complete than others. What was beautiful, of course, was to see the ones that have been fully embraced and appropriated by their communities. I think there was at least 2 that were fully alive, and you could see on the boards with the programming that the people of all ages are using them for a variety of workshops. And for some reason, there was one where the screen printing workshop seemed to be the most vibrant, heavily occupied space. And lastly, I just want to say, as was mentioned in some of the presentations, I thought the grounding that I think was evident to the local building culture that has such a weighty history in Mexico, given the antecedent, the long history of great architecture and especially of great public works, especially I'm thinking of the mid 20th century, you saw little nods to these precedents in some of the buildings. And I thought that was particularly gratifying because it gave them, it substantiated the buildings in their context and in this very, very special city. That said, I don't want to waste any more time and go straight into questions. We have a lot of questions. I'm going to start with one or a couple actually questions for Carlos. The first one would be why the number 25 and what was the rationale behind making 25 emblematic? That's the term that in Spanish I heard a lot over the weekend. These are the pilares emblemáticos. So is it a matter of creating a template for future similar community centers, or why have just 25? And how was it decided where these 25 would be located, Carlos?
Thank you, Suleman. Yeah, the process, when we first started having conversations with the city, the beginning was going to be like 1 or 2. But then when we were asked to curate a number of professionals, it was very evident that the profession, for it to be a body of work, I think the city rapidly understood that it needed to be more. As a matter of fact, there was a time in a discussion that there were going to be 50 and not 25. But I think during the pandemic, it was very difficult, to follow up. And I think it's also, we have to understand that the time constraints that a government has, for the design and the production. So I think this is just the beginning of an engagement that we will see more, that the city will produce. The idea was that this will prove to the city that the involvement on architects is a good idea in public works. And I think we're going to be seeing new announcements by the city of creating, competitions, open competitions in where more architects can get involved. So the number really happened. We wanted to do more. It was going to be 50 at the end. It's very important to mention, Suleman, that the process in which the city can hire an architect is very difficult, because the process and the revision that the firms had to go through to be able to be contracted by the city is very complex, And that was, you can ask some of my colleagues, but they had to go to to very, very difficult bureaucratic processes to be able to have, these big projects together. So that part was difficult. And at the end of the day, we were hoping that more will happen. But this was to test out, as possibilities, and hopefully that more firms will be involved in public projects,
Carlos, you actually brought up something I was going to ask you. How specifically, could you elaborate a little bit on how the firms were selected? If there was any specific criteria, did they all have to have experience with public or socially oriented work? How did it work?
Yeah, as I mentioned briefly, because I ran out of signal, we created an indicator that basically we were putting on an Excel sheet the amount of public work, construction that the firms had, whether they have some relationship to academia, that they have participated in a non-profit and social projects before. Really, it was like, if I was putting together a group of doctors, I wanted to know that these doctors have already performed some open heart surgery. It was really, I was given the responsibility to present to the city a number of firms, but at the end of the day, they were finally selected by the city. The city asked them to go through a very, very difficult bureaucratic process. In the process, a lot of firms didn't make that initial cut because some things were, they needed to have other paperwork and so on. But at the end of the day, I only suggested lots of professionals to the cities. And the city said, these are the ones that we like to work now. But their plan was to work with all of those at the time that we proposed that there were many more. And we're hoping that the city will continue to do some of these exercises. But yeah, the process was like that. They asked me to analyze, what were the right people also for the sites. There was a process in which you know, all these sites, you know, like I knew that Rozana Montiel had a terrific engagement because we have worked with her in several projects, that she will understand there was a very tense social thing going on. And again, we try to curate it a little, understanding the profiles of the firms, but also trying to find out whether they could commit to such a difficult project, which is, as Rone mentioned, the fees on the projects were very low. So I would say that almost every firm spent up more than what they've received in fees to develop these. And that was wonderful, you know, that they gave it the extra mile.
Thanks, Carlos. I think I'd love to know more about the process in which the dialogue with the eventual users of the spaces. I know that the communities and the neighborhoods were directly involved in the process of coming up with the program for each Pilares. And can you or maybe one of the architects speak to how a neighborhood's needs directly influence the program?
I can mention very fast because there were two ministers involved, the Minister of Education, which is a secretary, and the Minister of Public Works. The Minister of Education had previously gathered with communities and build the programs. Those programs were given to us, and then we would create the briefings. But before we even started designing, the government had already been in the sites, asking the community their specific needs, and even asking them whether it was a good idea, a good or a bad idea to build up Pilares work. Then all that information we put into the briefing, and then that was handed to the firms. We have to understand that this happened during the pandemic. So having social and physical interaction was very difficult at the time.
Great, thanks, Carlos. We have an audience question for Fernanda. Fernanda, when considering what program to include in the project, was there ever a dialogue or discussion about accommodating a program to facilitate the reincorporation of inmates back into the society, considering the specific site of your Pilares?
Yes, of course, it was one of the major concerns. We had a lot of meetings with the people from the prison, with officials, with all of the team. And it's a part of the program already in terms of, as they had already mentioned, my colleagues, working with your hands, working carpentry and multi-purpose rooms and doing culinary workshops. So it is already in a way part of the Pilares project. It's embedded. It doesn't have, my project doesn't have an additional understanding of that, but obviously yes, because of the site. So we know we have that condition that's probably greater in this site. And hopefully, yeah, the outdoor spaces in a way are an attempt to provide that quality of feeling among, I don't know, nature and feeling welcome. So the whole project attempts to give that idea of openness and visual connections, of never concealing spaces, never shutting your back or giving your back to somebody. So in a way, it's the feeling, the whole feeling is an attempt to give that back to the people, to the neighbors, but obviously also to the prisoners.
Thanks. While I have you, Fernanda, I think you beautifully said in your presentation that the result is yet to be seen. And I think there was an uncertainty embedded in this project for all architects involved, a lack of leverage over, once you were done with your design, how it would be executed, not to mention how it would then, once turned over to the communities, whether the spaces would actually operate in the way you envisioned it. How did you deal with that limited leverage? And was there, I know that, for instance, PRODUCTORA in their statement for the Pilares, they anticipated this that there would be so many changes to the way things actually worked, and maybe incorporated a certain level of flexibility into what they designed. What was your personal response to that? I think yours, Pilares, was one of the ones I visited, and I think there was questions about whether there would actually be a kitchen as was originally planned because of budget cuts. So as you yourself said, so much is up in the air. What was that like for you?
Yeah, great question. I'm still trying to deal with it, but it's something that happens, I'd say, in every project I've done in my life, even for private, very wealthy clients, because changes are something that's like really natural. So for me, it's trying to understand that architecture is not a fixed object. It's not even something that I own or I can control. It's not about architects' decisions. It's about how people are going to use something and appropriate themselves and make their own decisions, make their own changes. So flexibility is something that, yes, I consider always from the beginning. Flexibility and frustration and disappointment and changes in a bad way also. I mean, not obviously accepting them, but recognizing that they are a reality and I can fight against it as much as I try. But I also anticipated, as you said, in the project. And the whole project is about understanding that I won't be able to control anything. That's why I choose the cheapest materials, future maintenance, everything that I won't be able to control. The courtyards for me are that solution. I can just do this much. Everything else probably will not be in my hands, but at least 4 spaces that open up to the sky and you can control that.
Thanks, Fernanda. I think I'd like to hear from Laura and Amal. Maybe I'm forgetting about someone, but I think if you could maybe represent for the non-Mexican firms that participated in the program, in these 25 pilares, what did having an outside perspective and experience bring, whether it was an asset or a challenge? Had you worked in Mexico City? Were you familiar with the landscape?
Amal, you should begin.
Yes, you want me? Okay.
Go for it.
Yes, I mean, we were very familiar, well, not very, Dan was very familiar with Mexico City. I had some familiarity. Well, first I should say we're always on the outside, trying to peek in, you know, even when we're building in our own neighborhoods. And so I think being careful about that distance and collapsing it is important. In our case, we made it an integral part of the project. I think the collaboration with Ignacio's office was exactly about that. How do you practice today, sort of in various places? And I think collaboration is really the answer. And so we had like fantastic dialogues about, you know, our perception of kind of the history of certain kinds of architecture in Mexico City and natural from within. And so we made, you know, a lot of the dialogue was around that research. And just to give maybe an anecdote, you know, we kind of traced color, as I showed one slide, you know, across time, and realized that today, I think the contemporary landscape of amazing architecture in Mexico City is less colorful, maybe because of the burden of color, and that, yeah. And so we were like, yeah, but we can do color. We are, you know, you know, that gave us a kind of lightness. And in contrast, so we were color, and then Nacho was grids. He was like the modernist, you know, sort of super, you know, and so we played a lot with that. Within, without, and that conversation throughout the projects. And so I think that play of kind of interpreting from a distance, from close up, and in conversation and in collaboration, I think really made it through the project. And it was nice that we had also 2 projects to sort of have that conversation, you know, what is specific and what is generic. And to think about those in relationship to one another.
Thank you. And next we have an audience question. It's hyper specific. It's for either PRODUCTORA or Palma. I don't know who wants to take it. It's regarding Priani Pilares. Phil Allen asked, how does rainfall's potential damage figure in flat roofs? One.
it's like in every conference on architecture, there's a question about the flashing. No, I think this is the question. It's a very typical Mexican building system where people use flat roofs. I think you've seen a movie Roma, maybe you can see it. So I don't think we have to specify that very much. It's a sort of impermeabilizante rojo que viste en las fotos that you saw in the pictures. But now that I have the microphone, actually, Suleman, I want to come back a little bit about this question about that financial aspect, and I think Carlos is, I think, very open about this as well. It's not all. I see a lot of wonderful comments. It's not all. It's a difficult project, and it's often a very uphill battle. And if I'm honest, I spoke with Palma, our collaborators on this project as well, that one of the reasons we collaborated as well, that is because this project, they consume more resources than you get, and also a lot of energy. And a way for us to collaborate on these projects is kind of divide that amount of energy over 2 offices. It's kind of an easier. You divide the burden a little bit, I would say. And then I saw another question about budget and equipment and maintenance and educational stuff. And for example, we've been going back to our PILARES a lot. It's been open for almost a year. And since a lot of this project, we do it with a lot of personal effort and goodwill. And so it's very difficult to find the channels. For example, when we go to our PILARES and we speak to our coordinators like Diana, kind of seeing what are the possibilities to kind of leverage from our position as an architect, the few things that are missing, or the little elements of maintenance they need. And I think it would be wonderful if there's a sort of possibility to kind of continue to give more follow-up on these projects. But in the end, as an architect, you're a little bit as an outsider once the moment the building is finished.
Yes.
And if you're lucky, they let you in, and so I think we have all experienced that as architects.
You have to know when to let go.
Yeah, but I think we don't want to, because in the end, it's a process that's not finished. And I think Rozana spoke to that as well. We would love to be part of it.
Yeah,
that's not always a possibility.
I'm glad you mentioned Rozana, because I was hoping that Rozana could, it's more than a question, it's just, I think what went missing today a little bit for people who haven't visited the PILARES, are not as familiar with the program as we now are, is the very specific function they serve in terms of what's called in Spanish rezago educacional, people that drop out of high school, how you have entrepreneurship workshops for anyone who can learn some sort of trade craft in order to have some income. I think that was because it just sounds so abstract that these are community centers and you have educational and cultural programming. Rozana, with your PILARES, which was one of the, I saw in full bloom, really alive, full of programming, really embraced by the community. Could you talk a little bit about the functions that you knew would be taking place in the space and how that informed your design?
Sure. So thank you. Just to mention something before that Wone was saying, I think that what's really, really important, because I was there yesterday, so I have been there many, many times after.
I've heard you keep going, yeah. I
keep going because I have a sense of, I think that there's some little things that have not been done, and I think that I will not stop going until they are finished. It's just because I think as architect, we have that responsibility to see like these little things that if they are finished, then they're complete. And I think that one thing that it's really important is that these programs with the government, they have to continue with some maintenance. It's very important, even though we are working, and as I have heard all of my colleagues with, natural materials, very low maintenance, but but they also need this other thing that's like just taking care of things that are just like soap, you know, like paper and things like that. No, so I think that we have to really push that as architects. We have to do it to give this maintenance that it's not only with the materiality but also with what's happening inside the buildings. And just to continue with your question, like as Carlos already said, and everyone, we were living a pandemic. It was very difficult to visit those sites at the time that we were designing. So we were already informed with what was going to happen. They have been studying for years now what each of the sites need. So, and I think that some of them are repeated, no, like a cyber school where they teach computer classes, and when they're teaching after school programs, and different type of workshops as gastronomy, serigraphy, photography, vegetable gardens. But also what's been really interesting is that, for example, with the earthquake that just happened like 1 month ago, one school that is nearby was unable to, very small kids could go there after the earthquake because the building suffers some, I don't know, some cracks and some things like that. So now, yesterday I went, there's some little kids, like 3-year-old kids, that are using the Pilares as their school. So it's very important with this flexibility to understand that many programs can be done there. It's just like everybody also was saying, this idea of multifunctionality, of flexibility, where many things can happen. So we were given a specific program, but I think that in the Pilares that we did, now there are many other programs being done and implemented. You know, like they just put these things, these ring boxes, and they're having box classes and a lot of different. So 90 activities are done every week. It's very impressive. I was really impressive when Frida, the director, told me, like there are 90 activities done every week.
Thanks, Rozana. We actually have a lot of questions for Carlos, a lot of them from the audience. So Carlos, if I could get you back for a few minutes. Laure Nashed asks if Studio ZB Piensa Sostenible will work on other public projects in Mexico. If yes, what are the main learnings from Pilares, and what would you do differently in the future?
Yeah, there's new things in the oven, definitely. We're moving to city planning. You will see some of those projects come to life very soon. We have moved now and we have done the scale of the house, now the scale of the community center, and now in our process now we're at urban planning. And I think soon, I cannot talk about, but we're doing a major intervention in Iguala, in Guerrero, that you will see. So we finally began working with local governments in the development of projects. Also, there's been talks of public schools and other projects that takes a long time. You know, it's for the Pilares talked from, I mean, really takes years for this thing to happen, but we're constantly reading public policy, reaching out to leaders that are interested in creating social projects and creating strategies. But yeah, there's a lot. I think there's, I think what's to be learned, you know, it's knowing that there's inflation in the world, you know, and trying to calculate these things so you don't have to call your colleagues and let them know that the budget of their building is gonna shrink. So I think creating research. So I would say that, you know, the restriction is one, as architects, maybe designing for less. I think it's a really important thing because we often, I mean, budgets often run out. And if you analyze the economy, the world economy, the past 2 years, I mean, at the time when we decided to build the projects, steel and concrete, the prices were very different. And so the cost of the buildings, you know, from when they were planned to what they are today are very different. And I think
that you're talking about money, Carlos, because there's been a recurring question about how the Mexico City government funded these projects, and what Rozana touched on, how they will continue to be funded.
Well, I could answer the first. The first, I mean, every year or every government designates a budget, which gets approved, you know, at its Congress. And within the package of the Mexico City, the PILARES initiative was approved, but it was approved as a big package that included 300 PILARES. Of those 300 PILARES, they assigned an amount of resources for these pilots. And so it's really part of a program that it's, I would say, the main social program of the city. So it's part of the social development program of the government, and it gets funded by that. In terms of its maintenance, these buildings are now turning to the Education Ministry, and the Education Ministry has set up already a maintenance package, which, you know, if I do a thorough analysis, might be tight, but I think they have already allocated, you know, a budget in which they can supply proper maintenance. But I think my colleagues have tackled into a very important, I think, designing buildings which will be less expensive for the public use. It's a really, really important thought in the design process of the PILARES. So I think the city has a very well thought out plan. We will see how it goes. But at least in the information I have been given, it has been thought out, and we will see how it rolls out. No, but I have confidence that it will start moving properly.
We haven't heard from, I think, TO and A911. So let me ask either of the representatives from TO and A911 what the outreach was like with communities, not just to develop the program, but when there was some resistance, as I think was the case in both your PILARES. From what I heard over the weekend and what was mentioned on today, these were contested sites. There was distrust, as often is the case when any government, I think, is coming into an area with a project that is not understood from the beginning. Would someone like to, I don't know, Jose, Carlos, Zaide?
Yeah, sure. Well, actually, in our situation, from the 3 projects that we designed, 2 of them experienced difficulties in the process of the adaptation to the community and the site. One was the case of Xochimilco, where actually they had planned to make us like a smaller project, and in the end, we started to make the building and the foundations were just stuck there. So Carlos probably has more feedback on this, but the construction stopped at a point where actually many things could be, I don't know, dialogued and resettled, but we didn't hear more news from that side. So it's interesting to take this example as an opportunity to work with, because sometimes things like that actually happen, right? And on the other hand, there was a PILARES that was next to a hospital or to a social service building. And the original proposal of the site was moved. So we needed to adapt the project and also the program to some social aspects on the ground level. And that project is actually under construction with the new changes. So it's actually, I think, working on a balance with the social services and the original program of the PILARES. But yeah, they both have been very interesting examples.
But is it true that the one that I visited by you guys was the one that's all metal and wood and not almost done, but not quite completed? Is it true that the neighborhood there was maybe there's been some conflict with the neighborhood, or is that not accurate?
Well,
and if so, I would just be interested in how that was, if there were people went around explaining how this was something that was going to benefit the community.
Sure. Yeah, we actually went, to a lot of community meetings, like to talk about the project, the model and the plans. And there's always some people who don't like the project or are against the project for some reason. In that case, in Cuicuilco, we had this like arguing with a guy who was trying to defend the sporting part of the program. But then another lady of the community, like a leader, said, oh, you're like just like hanging out and consuming drugs, so you can't speak. So the people will start to arguing. So I think in every project of this kind of involvement of the community, and in that particular case, you had this like 3 huge habitational units. So yeah, it was like a very complex corner. But in the end, we also receive a lot of good like comments. So yeah, we think it's always like you have different opinions about your projects, but we're still wondering. And like Rozana, we went like yesterday, and we are trying and struggling to achieve some important parts of the project, like the vegetation, that it's very, very important in this project. So yeah, we're till the end, and we would like to see the project in a year or 2 to try to, yeah.
That will be interesting. Which brings me to one more question I have, probably for Carlos, but anyone is welcome to answer it. How, to the extent that they know the answer, how will the impact and success of these centers be measured? Is there something in place to say, as you said, 2 years from now? I don't know if you know this, or it's something for Carlos to address.
I think a good way to measure them is, we can look at social indicators in the area. And I think if we look at the census of a given time before the things were built, and the same census gets applied, by doing simple, data analysis, we will see that even things like crime rate, but it's very important that we don't only analyze the projects as the interior programs. I think the most exciting positive indicators will happen in the surrounding areas of the buildings. And of course, we're performing some of those analyses ourselves, because that's what we do in this office. But I think the city will undertake, its own indicators and process to try to measure the capacity. I think Rozana has already mentioned something really fantastic. The PILARES is already giving over 90 activities in a building that recently opened. So I think we'll have to find ways in which measuring that activity. But I think, we will see. I think there has to be a good analysis 1 year after, then the years, the subsequent, and then perhaps in a number of years to see what has happened to any of this. But I just want to mention, I think the Mexico City government is doing a great effort to have a good rate of these projects being complete. In my profession, out of 100 projects I do, only 5 get carried out. And this is the reality of many of us architects. So we developed 25 projects, and so far, 18 are under construction. So we're already over a 50% rate. So I'm not seeing, I cannot see the little details on the projects. I have to see the whole package. I have to try to see the strategy as a big effort. And that's often very confusing, because maybe I cannot fight the tree, but I have to fight the next building. And I think that's sometimes, I have conversations with my colleagues of, there are times in the process in which, but for me right now, my effort needs to go towards the application of the projects that haven't yet started. Because I think the changes, the little changes, the vegetation, the little details, those will happen, as a process of maintenance. But I think as a group, we should focus on the possibility of these buildings to happen, because there's only one bag of budget, right? And we have to understand that, and we're going through a very difficult economic circumstance in Mexico, that we need to understand that there's not going to be extra money, so we have to make it work. And that's something I wanted to touch upon.
Thanks, Carlos. We still haven't heard from A911, Jose. I don't know if I'm mispronouncing your name, Saide. I maybe wanted to, if you wanted to elaborate on the civic mindedness you touched on in your presentation. It was also one of the Pilares I visited, the one that's the one that's done and very much alive. It was one of the ones that was most active at the time I visited. I think what you were talking about, I saw the reference, or what I thought was a reference to the famous frontones by Aray on the UNAM campus, but it seems like you were also inspired by the Mercado de la Merced, by Enrique del Moral. What did you mean exactly when you said the civic mindedness was very much an integral part of what these projects needed to stand for?
I think, and it's a recurrent question among some of the comments, is that the role of the state in addressing the questions of social infrastructure. There's a clear idea that there was a moment, maybe 50 years ago, 60 years ago, where the state took a far more sort of a direction, a stronger role in providing infrastructure. I think, for example, Mayor Uruchurtu, who lasted a few years, had built hundreds of markets and hundreds of schools and hundreds of nurseries. So, and within that came out a very strong tradition of Mexican architecture, and some of them is achieved with very limited budgetary choices. As Carlos was saying, I think that the lesson for most of us is that it is possible to stretch and do quite a lot with just a bit. And for us, is this question of how do we make the most out of simple design gestures? On the one hand, we're very much interested, as To and Camilo team was saying, okay, conflict is at the core of cities, and conflict is at the core of architecture and urban planning choices. But at the same time, architecture can only go so far. In the capacity that it can go and address some of these issues that arise out of conflict, say occupy and transform a former fronton into a social infrastructure, I think choices do matter, and this is where kind of an economy of means can provide for change, and that's where, in our case, the roofscapes become instrumental.
Yeah, we believe strongly that social infrastructure should go beyond the program and budget. I mean, it has to go and had to get to that target, but I think it also is a kind of, in terms of the scale of what you do for the people in there. How can you make this architecture be appropriated by someone else? Some infrastructure that can transform during the time, can have different activities. So we believe that this kind of monumentality, without being like, like this show off from architecture, but I think it's very important, the scale, the way you design how you make more democratic spaces, how you obtain, like this skyscraper, this type of people to be proud of what they are using. And really, some of these places belong to very poor and very marginate society. So why not bring in the best for this community?
Thank you. That's exactly what I meant when that beauty and a subtle architectural gesture, which is not about showing off, as you said, but about bringing a sense of place, of beauty that that doesn't need to be a commodity either, but can be treated as a necessity. And I see it in your project. I see it in a courtyard and the height of the interiors at PRODUCTORA and Palma's PILARES. I see it in the beautiful integration of inside and outside at Presidentes de Mexico, which Rozana Montiel presented today. I see it in most of these projects, if not all of them. Some I couldn't see it because they weren't complete yet, but I think that's important. And as I said, it harks back to a tradition of Mario Pani, of the schools, of the markets of the 20th century. And I think for people who are not here in Mexico City, that was important to know. So thank you. Laura, I wanted to go back to you and first of all, apologize to you because I suggested earlier that you weren't from Mexico City. Of course, you're from here, but you've practiced, having practiced also stateside. Maybe a question by Linda Nishamkin, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, is perfect for you. Linda says the honest elegance of these projects is humbling. May I ask if you have any recommendations for architects in the US? The foresightedness of the city's government is beyond anything I've seen here in my city in Boston. Laura, do you have any suggestions for, and I know Laura is not the only architect who has practiced stateside and in other places outside of Mexico, but if Laura wants to take this question.
Sure, no, thank you, Suleman. I think it's a very good question because, you know, it definitely makes, I mean, I'm originally from Mexico City, so I did my undergraduate there. I worked with Alberto College for some time, and I've been practicing here for the past, you know, almost 15 years. So it's a very interesting combination of elements because obviously practicing here adds a lot more layers that are linked with liability and code compliances. And I think it was very refreshing, not only to collaborate with Francisco in that sense, but also like to be able to find opportunities, right? That we many times have to struggle to find here. So making some public work in Mexico with a Mexican colleague was extremely important. And then there were many conversations about, you know, things we could do, things we couldn't do. And I think that I always challenge that the academic discourse not always aligns with you know, the built environment and the actual practice. And I think that this project in particular, Pilares, does implement a lot of these academic discourses. You know, like blurring boundaries between public and private. You know, we were able to do suggestions like that public space on the second floor, right? Where you want to expand, you know, like an urban plaza of people actually inhabiting the space, not only from the school of Pilares, but also open it to the city, right? So the local and the foreign communities. So I think that, you know, obviously, as Carlos knows very well, it's been a battle, you know, and a series of negotiations to get these ideas and to push for those ideas in terms of like making a visible, visually permeable facade, right? Like sometimes it's an issue of public safety and security, but I think that we need to keep pushing those ideas to actually change, you know, our perception of all these, you know, walls and separations we put. So, I mean, it was a good mixture. And I think that, you know, Francisco sometimes had to remind us it was not, you know, as practicing here, but it was a great collaboration. I mean, we had a great dynamic, I would say.
Thank you, Laura. We have a question for Gabriela from an anonymous attendee. The question, by the way, Gabriela Carrillo's Pilares is privileged, as Gabriela herself mentioned, with a gorgeous site next to Parque Los Dinamos, which is a mountain with full of pine trees. It's their Oyames, I believe they're called, a very specific kind of local tree. So it's a beautiful site to which Gabriela responded with a beautiful building. And the question from the audience was, I would like to know, how did you determine the scale of analysis? Yes, 1 to 250,000 and so on, and which things on site helped develop the concept of the project. Gabriela, if I believe you're still
Yes.
here.
Yes, I am here. I am here. Thank you, Suleman. Well, thank you for the question. Well, I work in the city because I am also teaching 15 years ago in the UNAM. So we love to guide our students and to work in the city and with vulnerability, crisis, the lack of public spaces. So that's why we start with general regional analysis, and then we go to the scale of the alcaldía to understand the vulnerable issues, social issues, cracks, for example, and or all the complexities that we have in the city. And then, of course, we trace a circle, which is 500 meters distance. So to understand the very specific site. And talking about inspiration, I need to say that in this site, which has a very complex topography, if you were there, the streets are really small. You need to stop to let the cars flow easily. So if something happens, the whole neighborhood becomes crazy because of this topography. And we found out that the only public spaces that were in the neighborhood were 2 churches. So in Mexico, religion is very important. And for me, it was kind of a tragedy, I might say, to create a piece that became, in a way, a view and a window to the mountain, to the Dinamos park that you mentioned, which it's ridiculous because when you're on the streets, you barely see the mountains, you barely see the park. So was to create that to achieve as much as north light as possible. And the last one was one of these churches was really impressive. It was very high ceilings. It was also a skeleton, a concrete skeleton, and it had wood on the ceiling. So that I believe if we create something that seems to be something which is maybe a warehouse, but at the same time is something confusing like a church, maybe people will come here easily and will be attracted to this space. So I need to say that those churches, even though I don't believe a lot in religion, they were important because culturally, I believe they were really important for the site and the neighborhood. And it was very funny because when people went to the site, Daniel and I, and they asked, and they thought it was a church. So, and for us in a way was to work with informality, but at the same time, as I mentioned, to create a landscape and to dialogue with this tension between the mountain, the deposit of cars, and the topography at the same time.
Thank you so much, Gabriela. Melissa, we haven't heard from you yet, and sadly, I wasn't able to see the 10 project Pilares yet because it's not finished yet, but I heard, I was told by a friend from Obras, from the Secretaría de Obras who accompanied us on our visits, that it's the one he's most excited about. So I know it's going to be special and involves, I believe, a curved concrete wall. If you could maybe address what has been the biggest challenge for you other than budget, which has been addressed, if there was any other unexpected situation that you guys have dealt with that maybe also accounts for why it's not completed yet, or anything else that was unexpected during this process. I don't know, is Melissa still here?
Mute. Sorry, I'm back.
Oh, that's okay.
I was going to say maybe Carlos can answer this as well, but I feel like just like there was a process for the architects to be chosen, and that was maybe in another way with a criteria of experience and all of these different qualifications. The construction companies went through their own processes, and they might not necessarily be I want to say it's not necessarily the easiest process to work with a construction company that has different interests, right? So their interests are probably more in terms of time, in terms of how they can reduce costs, reduce budgets, reduce time, reduce reductions are kind of where their efficiencies are at, where ours are at a different place. So I feel like that has maybe not helped the process of our building, even though, like I said, it's probably not the only reason, but yeah, in our experience, we always like to say that we are on like the side of the client, where we want the best kind of building and the best kind of outcome, and then maybe the construction process is not necessarily always our best ally, because it implies it has just different priorities. So yeah, it's just been very slow.
Thank you so much, Melissa. We have another audience question from Alejandra Rodriguez. Maybe I also haven't heard from Francisco. Francisco, if you're still there, maybe you want to take this one. Is there talking about different priorities after working in social environmental projects like these? How can an architect translate or apply this experience and knowledge into high-end residential and commercial projects, or should these categories be completely isolated from each other in a firm's portfolio? Pancho, do we still have you?
I'm here.
Okay.
No, I think at the end, architecture is all about the same. It's about the space quality and also the idea of understanding the social. And I think that these are the most exciting projects. At least for me, I think these programs. We've been working with Carlos for years, since Infonavit, since the reconstruction of houses of the earthquake, and it's always the projects that tend to feel the soul for some parts. The residential and high end is very difficult in that sense. It's the same, it's architecture, but at the end it's very different, the feeling. I think that architecture and architects have to go more into this, pushing these kind of programs and these kinds of, because I think architecture can do the difference at the end. It can do the difference if a community of architects or a group of architects start pushing these ideas to the government and to the authorities. I think it's very important. Here it's Camilo from Colombia, and they have had great programs in Colombia. Now we were chatting now about this, that Medellin is not that great today, but they had great moments. I think Mexico City could have great moments now, and other cities in the world. So I truly believe, for me, it's very exciting. The high end and the residential, I think it's my most boring part of the office. I think this is very exciting, and I think architects, and especially if the ones that were in academia, have to push these ideas to students and to new architects.
Thank you so much, Francisco. We have one last question before I open it up to final comments by all participants, and this one is from the audience for Do. Carlos or Jose, would you like to address, what was the challenge? How was the challenge of using steel frames and wood in the structure and dialogue with the urban context? It came from Luis Gerardo Diaz Blancas, and I'm not sure if Luis means that the steel and the wood doesn't fit into the urban context, or maybe they can clarify exactly what. Carlos, Jose?
Yeah, I think the question has a couple layers. One, of course, regarding of the challenge of working with a hybrid steel and wood structure, because it's not a very common structural system for public buildings in Mexico. Actually, probably I will leave Carlos answer that question, because he worked deeply into who to work with in terms of the wood and making a structural wood system, which actually is very interesting because it's intends to promote a renovating and circular economy in construction. But on the other side, regarding to the other layer of the question of how this contrasts with the typology of the architecture of the site, I think we decided to work with that structural strategy because it provides a flexible and transparent space Zapote neighborhood is made with very narrow streets, and that's where the violence takes place. So we decided to make a ground floor that was very transparent and like a curtain, and where you could see a lot of the activity happening inside, and that the program could be integrated to the outside. So the steel strategy of very thin columns was the right answer, right? And also to make a very light structure that works well with the earthquakes. But maybe Carlos and Camilo want to delve further into that questions.
If there's any additional comments.
Yeah, for sure. I would like to invite Camilo to say something about, because he to participate, but yeah.
Oh, please go ahead, Carlos, first.
Okay, so yeah, for us it was important, as I said in the presentation, that as we have this very narrow plot, we need to achieve like a very thin column, and in our city that it's like almost like impossible in some parts of the city because of the earthquakes and the movements, and we needed to achieve a very light system.
Yes.
That with masonry or concrete are very difficult to achieve like that resonance and that behavior, structural behavior. We call the meseta sísmica, which is like a line on the frequency of the waves of the earthquake, which you can achieve like with a very strong structure or with a very light structure. And in this case, the answer was like to mix these two elements, the wood and the steel, to achieve that small column, because we had this very small space. And yes, also related with the idea of this huge greenhouse, like in an industrial logic of a very quick construction process, and very open to the different kind of climates and perspectives, and also as Jose said, like to diffuse this frontier or barrier between the outside and the inside of the building.
It's stunning. It's incredibly transparent. There's something cathedral-like about it, or at least to me there was. With that, I would like to end the formal Q&A part and open the floor for anyone who'd like to make some final comments. Any of the speakers, Amal, Fernanda, Carlos, this is your opportunity to add something that you think we missed during this beautiful discussion.
Suleman, I just wanna, I don't know, I'm super thankful to everyone because I ran out of time. My intention was to really present my colleagues with the admiration they deserve from a fellow architect. I just want to say that I believe in architecture very much, and that the power it changes to change social disparities. And that I'm super thankful to all the colleagues that joined, because I think regardless of the indicators, we have proven yet once more that architecture can make a difference. And that's why that's why these professionals, these levels of professionals were involved. And I know there are many more, and they're doing terrific projects in Mexico and everywhere. But I think this is an effort that shows that the power that architecture and architects can have in our society to make things better. And for that, I'm very grateful to all of them. To you, because you have been, always really interested in, talking about previous work and other things. And to the league, to Anne, and to all the members and all the board members, which include former professors and people that I admire, and to the audience. Please reach out, to continue the conversation. And thank you very much, and to Rafi and to our offices and to my team that it's not here, but it's really the people that makes all this work happen. And to the government of Claudia Sheinbaum for trusting a group of architects to join an effort on public projects and policy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carlos.
Carlos, that was basically, I think, a perfect thank you summary. I just want to add that 3 and something years ago, many of you on this call really responded as an architecture community to the League's visit, that the work that we're seeing here tonight, the opportunity, I've never been on a program bluntly with this many architects, with this kind of collaboration around probably some of the most important building happening globally today. And so really it's extremely moving, but I think it was, I can't remember, maybe it was someone who mentioned the issue of community of architects. I think the ideas that you're pushing forward with your collaboration, both with Carlos Zedillo, but also in Suleman's description of actually being there and what's happened, is really, we're all grateful. And thank you on behalf of the audience, all the members of the League, all of the staff of the League, everyone, thank you. And I'm gonna just clap because I have to. It was so amazing. Thank you.